Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Tertiary Education. Is he satisfied with how enrolments are being managed in the tertiary sector? If not, what actions is he taking?
Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I have mixed views on how institutions are managing their enrolments and believe some could do better. I have spoken directly to Vice-Chancellors in a number of cases and they have undertaken to manage their enrolments better. The Government took a number of steps in Budget 2010 to relieve pressure on institutions. For example, funding a record number of places at universities in 2011, which is about 5,600 more than in 2008, changes to student loan entitlements for new residents and Australians, and the introduction of a performance element for existing students, the requirement to pass the equivalent 50% of their full-time courses over 2 years.
Grant Robertson.
How does the Minister think that Victoria University turning away 1,500 students, Massey University 2,000 students, Waikato University 600 students and thousands more at other universities and polytechnics will help close the wage gap with Australia?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, those numbers quoted are interesting numbers and the reality is they're mostly quoted in the media. I noticed that Otago has closed its enrolments and in actual fact has turned down 30 applications for second semester 2010. Nevertheless, it's never ideal to turn away too many students, and that's why we're working and have increased the number of places in 2011 and also put the limits on student loan entitlements for new residents and Australians and the introduction of a performance element for existing students to ensure that they either use their education wisely or make way for somebody new to come into the system and have their opportunity.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
With respect, although the Minister talked about part of that question, the actual question asked how those reductions in the number of students would help close the wage gap with Australia.
Order, but the member will reflect that the Minister in answering the question disputed the statements contained in the member's question, and the Minister is quite entitled to do that. Grant Robertson, supplementary. Yes, no? Beg your pardon. Carmel Sepuloni.
To the Minister of Tertiary Education, which of the following national government actions is more likely to increase the numbers of Māori and Pacific enrolling and succeeding at university? A. Refusing to lift caps on tertiary institution enrolments. B. Time limits on student loans. Or C. NZQA changes to NCEA requirements for university entrance, which will make it more difficult for thousands of secondary school students to gain eligibility to enter university.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, the member, like me, is a new member in this Parliament, so she may not be aware that the reason for the student caps was because of the previous government's approach to student support and interest-free student loans, which they then introduced caps to try and control the cost of tertiary education in 2008. Nevertheless, I'm confident the performance-linked funding initiatives that we're putting in place will encourage institutions to provide the pastoral care and support that will improve the outcomes for all New Zealanders, including young Māori and Pacifica.
Grant Robertson.
What work has he done on the impact on closing the wage gap with Australia from universities and polytechnics shutting the door on some student enrolments, especially in light of the fact that while New Zealand tertiary institutions are trying to work out how to keep students out, Australian ones are working out how to get them in?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, the member's question is interesting. We actually have the latest statistics show that we actually have a higher percentage of student graduates in New Zealand as a proportion of our population 25 plus than in Australia, which goes to show Australia perhaps has a little bit of catching up to do. I would also point out that as a percentage of our GDP in New Zealand, we spend slightly more on tertiary education than the Australians do. The issue is in fact the size of our GDP, which is why the government has a very comprehensive economic growth agenda to grow our GDP so we can afford more on these sort of services.
Question number 11, Jackie Dean.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.